Thank you to the panelists for a really excellent session on software-defined infrastructure management. Now I'd like to invite the panelists from VMware, HCL, and CA to come up on the stage. And I'd like to introduce Edward Wustenhoff and invite him to moderate the session on how IT will be transformed to become a broker of services. Edward is the founder and CTO of Burstorm, an innovative company that focuses on connecting businesses to cloud service providers. Edward.
We have a very great panel here, and I think this is somewhat a change of pace, as this is a little bit more of a fluffy topic, as in how is the SDI going to transfer and transform IT into a broker of services. We heard a lot of it in the previous discussions. There's a challenge around what is the role of IT going to be. It used to be a manager of technology. Now it's becoming a manager of something else, and what exactly is that? So with that, I'd like to give the panel members 30 seconds to introduce themselves real quick and give their angle to this particular topic. John?
Hi everyone, John Michelsen. I'm the CTO of HCL Technologies. Most analysts will call us number 1 or number 2 in IT management and cloud management and various areas. Our customers are asking us, how can I turn my IT shop into a service provider and compete with the likes of HCL? Or leverage HCL alongside my own capabilities and other third-party vendors? And how do I change my application stack and my delivery of IT services such that I can accomplish that very thing?
Thank you. KK?
Hi, this is Kalyan Kumar, HCL Technologies. We're known as the pioneer in alternate delivery model. We work with customers, primarily helping them replace what we call legacy existing outsourcers and help them adopt a new alternative model, provide them trust, transparency, and flexibility in the way we engage. Our classic challenge with customers around this is they want to continuously adopt and evolve to the newer capabilities available on the cloud, newer functionality, but they still want someone to still drag the train along, right? Someone has to keep managing the legacy, but find an evolutionary path up to adopting all these pieces, and then they're expecting that at a certain point of time, they may do a flip over, but that is always a dichotomic situation. So we keep working with customers to help them evolve into a service integrator. That's the model, which I think.
Thank you. Bill?
Thank you. Bill Fathers from VMware. And at VMware, I'm the general manager for a new business that VMware is launching. So we're a startup within a bigger company, and we're launching a new vCloud hybrid service offering that takes full advantage of the software-defined infrastructure that VMware has built. So my last 5 or 6 years was starting and then growing a company to $1.5 billion, providing cloud-based services to clients. So my basic premise is to advise internal IT departments to stop building these things themselves altogether and just outsource it to third parties. It's too complicated.
I have a question about that for you. So I'm Edward Wustenhoff. I'm CTO of Burstorm. Burstorm builds software to help organizations move to the cloud. And we have a lot of data to help map the strategies of IT departments to what is out there in the market. So we're a little bit in the now, and we're looking in the future. So we also see, as Bill knows, what the providers are creating as services for their customers, and that's what we help our customers with. So since you started, Bill, you talk a lot to customers, and if you were to explain to a CIO what the key cost-benefit aspects would be for moving into a service-defined infrastructure, what would you tell them?
Yeah, I think the last 6 or 7 years has sort of shown me that typically if a CIO is trying to make a case for a very big investment to deploy a brand new technology, they should probably rethink what they're trying to do as opposed to give them advice on how to do it. I'm not sure that the business case, unless the client is at huge scale, the business case is there for them necessarily to try and do it themselves at all. Mm-hmm. I think one of the whole points of this transformation that's going on is it's the ideal time to stop trying to do a lot of these things yourself, but in fact outsource it and get somebody else to take on the risk and complexity associated with it. So I'm not convinced there is a great business case for, other panelists may not agree with me here, but I'm not convinced there is a great business case for driving that transformation within it. The whole point is now is the perfect time to outsource it.
KK?
So I think it's a simple mathematical model to decide whether you want to keep stuff inside or move it outside. If the sum of total capacity which you consume peak across all internal stuff justifies you to set up something internally, you should do that, or else look at a provider who can do it for you. Maybe public cloud, virtual private cloud, get someone else to build a private cloud in a utility model, doesn't matter how you want to consume it, but use the right economical method to determine what needs to be done. And I think there's a flip side is the classic IT budgeting historically until today is CapEx based. You talk to the CFO, whatever it happens, they want to count CapEx, maintenance, renewals. You start moving them to a utility model. We have to even educate the finance and the other aspects. Is you need to learn that you will get like electricity bill, power bill. You have to budget this as an OpEx. You have to have a lot of things to measure. I think the previous panel, a lot of discussion on metering and collecting data, and I think we use technology from both these sides and then from a lot of the panels before to put this whole thing together. But the reality is someone needs to educate the CFO too, to figure out, okay, how do you cost for the services? You have to find a way to consume them and then find a way to charge it back to the business.
And so I would say separate the outcome you want to buy from the how you're going to accomplish it, and that's why I think the purpose of this panel being as a service, possibly even delivered by a third party, is an option instead of your own bespoke implementation of a best practice. Why not just buy one that already exists? But separate those two apart. We routinely go to our customers and say, it's the app, stupid. This has been essentially said in a few different ways already. If I can accelerate your application development, test, delivery, and maintenance by 30 to 75%, regardless of how you want that outcome. We'll talk about the outcome later, but just like you don't have the surgeon to explain exactly how the surgery is going to happen and then decide you want it. It's the question is, do you need that outcome? Then you'll have to ask for the surgery, and you'll leave it to the surgeon to decide exactly how. So let's separate those two, and let's definitely focus the business case around what is that outcome worth to me, and what is the investment required in order to get it, and then we'll figure out how we'll do it later.
Good. KK, you help a lot of customers transition.
Yep.
And aside from the technology questions, right, what would you consider is the most challenging part from an organizational perspective?
Technology is important. I think half the problems are created there. So equally it's important to understand that it solves problems and it creates problems. I think two aspects, security compliance. Auditors are 50 years back, and I was having a conversation that one generation will vanish, but I would say the next two generation also has to vanish over a period of time to really change the regulations. So someone has to, so I have a slight disagreement with the previous panel where the discussion was ITIL is dead. ITIL evolves. You still have to have the checkpointing. You will not do all the tasks humanly, but somebody ought to keep a record. We're realizing this is a big problem. The third thing is about changing the process. How do you consume? How do you manage? How do you monitor? How do you use it? I think there needs to be a change in the way, the process aspects of this. And then last but not the least, I think operating model. Let me give an example. Today you have sysadmins who configure and you have developers who code. Now the whole drive is sysadmins will program and the developers will configure. You just think of an operating model problem you are creating within customers. It's the end of the day about people, correct? Ideal state, there's no people, IT runs on its own. But the reality is you need people. So I think there's a lot of skill transition, like VMware, correct? Even people today, we have Yavas. We've been working with customers to create something called converged administrators. They know a bit of compute, a little bit of storage, a little bit of network. Because you have a problem in a highly virtualized, FCOE-based compute environment. You can't have 7 people troubleshooting it, right? You need to have ability to. So I think there is a people aspect to this, which we forget. I think it goes back to the old, your people, process, and technology, correct? So I think the people aspect becomes very important.
Yeah, I would agree. We didn't invent ITIL and then everybody started doing it. It actually is the reverse engineering of how we needed to do things so that we could standardize it and actually measure it well. I think that the feedback you're getting, at least from these two guys here, is it just needs to run at network and compute speeds, not at people and paper on desk speeds. But that's the reality. And in fact, the faster we go, the higher the risk of change we have causing unintended consequences. That again, we had to have that traceability and the predictability of the steps in order to then automate the reversal of those things. So whether we think of ITIL as a human series of steps or we think of it as an automated set of steps, it has to happen.
I think some of the other panelists we spent a lot of time thinking about the dynamics between a line of business within a company and the IT function. And the extent to which the line of business has really wrestled control away from the IT function for the deployment of a lot of IT decisions and a lot of spend control. So I think if I was within an IT function today that was thinking of deploying this technology as a way of demonstrating greater agility, greater value for money back into the business, I'd think about how I'm going to reconnect myself back with a line of business and regain credibility. And actually think about that as a service provider would, which is you actually need to establish an account relationship with your line of business and learn how to sell to them effectively. Because otherwise you run the pretty big risk of building this incredible SDI-based infrastructure and then no one's going to use it because the line of business has just gone off and done something else, which seems to be happening with increasing pace.
Correct. You see that a lot, yeah. So is there a relationship between that and the emergence of the DevOps within the IT department?
Is there? I would say, so short answer is yes in many cases, where developments drive to be more agile and to take those biweekly or monthly, well, they say release ready, very, very infrequently, or very frequently they are not release ready, but that's a separate story. Agile still has work to do. When Agile teams are driving their development cadence to, let's say, a monthly release pattern, and then it's a 3 months from build to deployment, that's what's driving DevOps in many of these organizations, where they're essentially saying the rest of this process, this whole supply chain of delivery of these changes, has got to take the same concepts of more streamlined automation, forcing collaboration. We used to separate dev and test with very thick walls and use process to keep those folks from arguing with each other. And now we say, forget it, break down the wall, put them all on the same team. We're going to have to mash this together to make it work well together. And we're doing the same thing with the entire dev test group and ops in order to have the same notion. And it's just that continued, in most cases, that continued drive to agile, where the business manager asks for a change to take advantage of something, and the developer says, I could have that ready in 2 weeks, then asks why they don't have it for 4 months. The answer to many of those conversations is, we're mashing all this together, we're going to get to the point where we can have it within a month.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think with DevOps, I think we see 3 different things. The first is a cultural shift. We've seen big mistakes being committed by organizations where they create a DevOps organization. Now you had a dev, you had an ops, now you have a third entity. Now you're trying to manage. So I think it's a cultural shift. You have to get the dev and ops. You may have some roles like a DevOps manager who's basically from one of these teams anchoring that, but you cannot create. Third is DevOps is not for the enterprise end to end. You have to understand which applications need DevOps. SAP ERP systems running FICO, you don't want to apply DevOps there, correct? You want, where there is a high rate of change, you bring in DevOps. There are application sets. So people have to understand it's not just like you have a new buzzword and I want to just go and deploy it. I think it's about which category of applications need what determines. I would say automation of release management should be common across the whole landscape, but how speedy and how fast to do that. Just add to the point on agile. I think the challenge is that it's agile dev today, it's not agile test and agile ops. I think SDI will help in a way that you made that whole underlying process completely smooth, so that your ability to move that, it's not about doing continuous integration and putting a code in Jenkins, correct? But it's about taking it and delivering it to production. And I think, and instrumenting it and creating a feedback back to I think the most important is, I think the valid point as I made in the previous panel is, the dev needs to understand ops and vice versa, correct? And I think that feedback loop has to exist. They have to get the feedback back. What mess I did in my code, which caused production. Today it's tickets jumping across, correct? So rather than that, you make a tighter integration.
Yeah, I think John and KK have covered it well. Just, I would just say from an entrepreneur's perspective, it's a pretty white space at the moment. That whole landscape, I think, is a great area of opportunity.
Definitely agree with that, because there's so part of the promise of SDI is the level of agility that it brings, and part of the transitioning of IT into a service-oriented organization or brokerage of service is the challenge that comes with the fact that SDI now allows you to basically change the infrastructure from underneath the application. And what would you think is the key challenge from an IT perspective to manage that while not losing the agility that SDI is bringing you? Bill?
It's really hard, isn't it? So we've just in the last 12 months or so built a platform where we've got entirely virtualized infrastructure across compute, network, and storage, and obviously we're trying to run apps in a virtualized way as well, and multiple third-party applications. And obviously, I think the thrust of the conference is to identify areas of opportunity for entrepreneurs, something that can help manage that complexity, so that you can somehow synchronize release management processes for the underlying virtualized infrastructure and the application layers that live on top of that, is a massive gap. It's at the moment, I think many organizations are trying to work that out for themselves and build their own tools.
KK?
So I think one of the key aspects which we see from the evolving into brokering, I think there are three levels which we see. So I think the first is you broker services, which is you get something from someone and deliver it to them, just generate billing or something. The next layer is start aggregating those pieces, correct? You start creating some benefit. You may do arbitrage. You may want to pass the benefit back to the customer depending upon what is the contractual model. The third is about service integration. I think that flipping the piece, I would say, is you have to do the whole cost economics and figure out flipping what. See, the question is infrastructure commodity or is platform commodity? Or it depends upon what you really want to flip. I think if you really see compute, I think that the way the price is going down, it's not really the compute. I think we clearly see it's the cost of the network. I think it's very, very important to understand that the whole connectivity, I think there's a lot of confusion today within customers when they get a bill at the end of the month. They suddenly see that they have some $50 on compute for something, and then they see a $200 network bill, correct? And there's no way for them to account for it. And I think they're trying to figure out fundamentals like net flow is coming back. People want to collect data back and saying, okay, let me figure out how much traffic I'm really pushing. I think it's not about flipping the infrastructure. You should have a choice, but I disagree on a practical, realist perspective. You will not be switching from AWS to Rackspace to GoGrid like on a morning and an evening basis, because that's not going to happen. You will have the flexibility to move if you're not happy before you are locked. Now the ability to disengage and go somewhere else. Like if VMware comes with like some 10 vCloud providers, you have a choice, correct? If I like A, B, and C, I can go, correct? I think, and the second thing, there has to be some level of standards, actually. I think this whole image conversion and this whole, it's a nightmare. Now even converting VM images is a pain. Now you think of this whole virtual network, virtual security. There is no standard way, correct, to move all this content across. I think flipping, I'm not pro flipping. You should have a choice to flip, but you can't be flipping every day.
Yeah. Well, there's a cost of acquiring and there's a cost of exit, right?
And just to maybe give a point of hope, because I think both Bill and KK both basically beat it down pretty good. It's a huge opportunity when you think about it, especially in our customer base where we have very large customers that every hardware purchase became an annuity. They have to pay to maintain that particular configuration or that particular hardware architecture, and even when they can't get upgrades or new versions, they can't migrate those applications. The introduction of virtualization allows us to abstract, and it actually enables us to then swap out hardware, and it gives us an opportunity we have not had in a significant way outside the mainframe and anywhere else that I can recall. So it's a really, really valuable thing. So despite it being hard, and despite us not knowing how to manage it or account for it, it's definitely a value for us to figure this out, because it'll allow us for IT infrastructure to own IT infrastructure, and for apps and DevOps teams to own that, and those be dissociated and actually have their own plans. They aren't so tied together.
Maybe there is a space to create something, correct, for budding startups to figure out this whole switching mechanism to make it more elegant in the public cloud. I think in the virtualized environment it's easier, but on the public cloud,
It seems to need a slightly higher level of abstraction, right?
Yep.
Is that you don't make the decisions anymore about, what is the network provider or who is, is it Juniper or is it Cisco? You say, okay, I need this capability
Yep, right.
to run my...
Right, that's automation run on SDI equipment,
Exactly.
right? SDI-enabled equipment. So we have, again, it's opportunity. This isn't a realization. I don't have a SKU for it, and I wish I did. But there's definitely an opportunity here for us to get this right and do ourselves a really huge favor.
So this is a more pragmatic question, but what would be your first step to take when moving into an SDI environment? And the step that would tee you up to be really successful?
Yeah, all right, great.
John?
My first would be, I've got to sell. I've got to get everybody on board that standardization, commoditization, automation are a tremendously valuable end state. So what I've got to do is I've got to get folks to think, let's not rush to do a couple of things, start ad hoc, and then have something that is going to run out of control and I can't build upon. So I'm going to start by selling the value of doing this right from the beginning, and standardization and leveraging commoditization, and then layering automation on top is going to get me where I'm trying to take them. So I've got to start with selling.
I think the org has to make a first very important decision. Do you want a horizontal strategy or a vertical strategy? See, I think we're seeing in the industry, one way we're consolidating data centers, storage, compute, network. On other sides, you have Exadata, Pure Data, all this vertically integrated compute, storage, and network stack. So I think the decision has to be, you want to go this route or you want to go this route and put anything on top of that. And again, I think SDI's decision has to be based on platform and the application, what do you want to do. It's very, very important to understand what do you want to standardize, what do you want to deploy, because there are licensing constraints, there are so many other things that's going to come and you don't even know what are the other loopholes is going to come. So I think you have to take a decision horizontal versus vertical. Second thing is, I think this orchestration is going to be painful. In the previous discussion that was happening, a lot of conversation, multiple orchestrations. I think there is a clear space to have a master orchestrator which is driving underlying orchestrations. VMware would build their own orchestration, OpenStack would have. I think because that's going to be easier for them, like Microsoft as System Center, they will do all these things to control their piece. You need to have a layer on top which has ability to control those pieces, have a common catalog, ability to drive identity management. Because now, if you talk IP can become an identity source. You may have to manage an identity for an IP address because now you're tying that to a device. You may not want to have access control on top of that from an IAM perspective rather than trying to do ACL port-based access control. So I think it's very important to do these two things, vertical versus horizontal. And second thing is shift up on the management stack. Focus on the higher layer rather than on the lower layer.
Yeah. I think those are both very good points. I think I would say think very carefully about which application workloads you're going to try and deploy onto this new virtualized or SDI infrastructure. You probably find that traditional applications, you're going to struggle to develop a business case to move your entire ERP platform onto an SDI infrastructure and demonstrate any meaningful business benefits. It's probably the next-gen applications you're developing, analytic tools, whatever it may be, sort of highly scalable web apps, that you should sort of say, okay, these are the applications that are net new, and I'm going to deploy infrastructure, SDI infrastructure for this net new application workload.
So basically you're saying not all applications are created equal, and some lend themselves better and some you should just not work on?
I certainly think that, well, my premise there is a couple of things. Firstly, I think you're trying to demonstrate, regain credibility as an IT function and demonstrate great return on investment. And I think SDI is probably one of the best things for years to be able to do that. Secondly, I think if you build an infrastructure that's ideally suited for a next-gen application, it's unlikely to be suitable for an SAP or a big Oracle database environment. So if focus on a next-gen app, perhaps it's a Cloudera-based Hadoop platform, build something that's very low cost, highly scalable, offers great blob storage, and sort of you're driving your unit cost down massively, but it's horizontally scalable. It's a different infrastructure than probably what you're going to need for your traditional app workload.
Right, shifting a little bit to the financial aspects, and Keike, we talked about this over lunch just briefly, but there's so many different business models out there now, right? So there's AWS as pay by the hour, reserved instances, and there is a huge unpredictability about the cost of an SDI. So what would you suggest to a CFO who is used to have fairly predictable costs and now is confronted with this highly dynamic cost infrastructure?
I think so. The first thing which I think within IT is something needs to happen is to clearly define a service catalog. We've been caught up so much on the CMDB, it's important, but that's more for back-end when you're managing everything on your own. But when you're going to consuming services, and I look at two views of the SDI, enterprise creating SDI infrastructure and SDI for a service provider who's using it and you consume it. Then you don't care about what he runs in the back-end as long as you get what you want. So it's very important to create a service catalog. That becomes the center of your universe. It is not the CMDB. CMDB is still the center of the universe for IT operations. The service provider would have his own CMDB to manage his stuff. The enterprise would have their stuff. But I think the service catalog becomes very important. So you clearly define what's a service, what's a technical service, what's the business service, who's consuming what are the costing inputs for the service, and clearly identify those three types of model: allocation-based, usage-based, time-based. You primarily have three kinds of models, and you really define, I think, as IT cost management or IT, that whole piece, that you need to have a way to cost your whole stuff. And then you start looking at, okay, if I go and consume A or B from outside, what does it look like? I think a lot of times people don't do that. They look at a point business case and jump in, and then over a period of time, they suddenly start to realize something else is changing. So it's very important, like snapshots in public cloud. How many times you replicate? Suddenly you see storage costs are 3, 4, 5x suddenly because you have multiple regions, you have to snapshot. There's a lot of good things, but you have to really start factoring those pieces into account. So we recommend that get a catalog, think through what we delivered, what are internal services, what are external services. And I think it's very important that the CFO takes charge of this if the CIO doesn't take charge, because at the end of the day he's going to get hit with flexible bills which you can't predict. And I think surprisingly the way our industry is that we expect predictability. On one side we want elasticity and flexibility, but on the other side, pricing and other stuff, we want predictability. So I think B2C apps fit in very well. What I call B2E apps, business to employees, which is more the enterprise apps, you ought to find a way to really define the cost model for that, because there you have an ability to, like Netflix example, correct? You have a number of subscribers, you can charge more, you can spend down. But in a B2E, you don't have employees coming in and going every day, correct? So you have to find a mechanism to find a way to cost that. John?
Yeah, not only that, but I think even for the B2C apps during dev and test, you want stable, predictable controls you can budget on a monthly basis and know what they are 12 months out. And yet you would put those very apps in production, and since there's revenue generally or cost savings tied to those transactions, you don't mind those being elastic. So it's even in the application, it depends on where it is in a life cycle. And I think that this is again an opportunity for TiEcon attendees to be thinking, because frankly, the CFO in that organization right now is used to thinking, okay, $30 million I'm going to spend on hardware this year or infrastructure in the data center, and now I get bills of varying amounts, and they don't understand. And especially when the IT folks can't really predict and say why it went up or why it went down, because that's such a nebulous thing. You were talking about using NetFlow. It's like, why did it go up? Why are we doing this? So I think there's definitely an opportunity here for us to really get that right. And then of course that has to turn into policy. Those policies has to turn into feedback into SDI type transactions, so that we can know we've exhausted budget, or we have to get special approval to keep going, or whatever it is. So I think there's definitely a space here, and it has to get solved.
I just very simply say, I think do a very careful buy versus build analysis as whether you really can pull this off yourself, or whether you're just better off buying it as a service.
That's a very good point. With the hundreds of new providers and the thousands of new products that are coming to the market, right? And they change. How do you see the IT organization that wants to become a service broker? What kind of tools or ideas can you give them to manage that? What do you tell the CIO has to say? Well, AWS is great now, but tomorrow it might be XYZ. How do you prep them for that? Bill?
It feels like the key value add the IT function can provide is trying to map workloads to provider, and just saying, look, if it's this kind of workload, this is probably the best kind of provider you should go for.
And you define best, how you do determine what best is?
Yeah. I guess it's that sort of, and be clear on that, and it's going to be the balance of performance, security and cost. And I just, in my last 2 or 3 years, probably more than ever, I've seen clients willing to make major sacrifices on security for the sake of cost and performance.
I think the CIO should really look at from a perspective that should I build or buy is one. The second is, should I go and use a provider who will do this for me? I think ideally I would say, come to HCL, we'll fix it for you. But you need to have a provider who can do this whole thing for you. And then the third thing is, it's very important to come back again to the service catalog. I think if you know what you want, I think a lot of times people outsource an expert, someone else to solve their problem. It's very important to know what you want. Someone else can come and fix it for you, definitely. And create a service integration layer within your organization. You create a layer which can integrate different pieces.
Absolutely true, both those things. I think the other aspect is IT is used to thinking of itself as control and providing access to things. Not anymore, right? Now it's things out there that it needs to bring in and offer back out to the business. So it needs to essentially embrace the things that lines of business are doing. It needs to get ahead of the lines of business in order for it to pilot and trial things. It doesn't want to be the guy that's on the oldest version of software. It needs to be on the newest version of software, right? So IT's closed in nature, and controlling access needs to turn into the opposite. So it's got to have more of an exploratory angle to it. It has to spend more time trying to find enablers for ways to do things, as opposed to, until it's on our timeline to think about it, we're not going to think about it. So I think it's really there where the biggest challenge is for IT.
And they probably should do it ongoing.
That's right.
So it's not a one-time project.
That's right. A team of folks, engagement people.
I get the red light here. So thank you very much. I hope this was useful for you all. And again, I'd like to thank the panel for being here and sharing your insights.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much to all the panelists for their insights on the transformations and the opportunities that are there in the software-defined infrastructure management space. We'll be taking a break now, but please do come back at 3:45 for the next session on software-defined storage. Thank you all.